Hello and welcome to the second interview from Left Foot Media. It's an interview with Donal Lavery on his launch of his new book, The Donohoe Scandal. The title of this interview will be Separating the Fact from the Fiction and continuing on from our last conversation. So welcome, Donal. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Anthony. Good to see you.
So I was hoping to inform some of the viewers about what's been going on the last. We haven't done an interview in maybe 5 or 6 weeks, could be longer. Just on what's going on back home. Obviously, for everyone who doesn't know, I'm based in the United States, so I'm keeping informed from afar. But I hope you don't mind if we run through a series of questions just to keep people informed and let you do the talking about what's been going on and keep people up to date. Is that okay with you?
Yep, of course. Yep.
So I've noticed that you have been vindicated in your legal battle with the book at the Attorney General's office. How does that feel?
Well, I think it's a huge relief in the sense that I knew deep down that there was nothing actually in the book that I couldn't stand over, and there's certainly nothing in it that hasn't already been placed in the public domain by others, including other media outlets which have been referenced therein. So, I mean, I knew that really there wasn't sufficient legal grounds for them to take any real action on the book, and a lot of people were saying to me that they didn't really see what the huge fuss was about in terms of the actual legalities to it. Whenever I got the correspondence and letter from the Attorney General's office, obviously I was grateful, but I knew that deep down I knew that any legal action against me for publishing a book would be quite unusual, in the sense that I feel that it would be a breach of Article 10 of the Human Rights Act here, which guarantees freedom of expression, not to the extent that you have in America, but it provides some safeguards for writers, young or old, new or established, in terms of what the actual content of what they're producing. I knew as well that in terms of the European Convention on Human Rights, that would, in a sense, have supremacy over any sort of analysis or legal opinion from some others. I am a bit stunned that it actually made it as far as that. But I think there have been many peculiar developments in terms of all of this, and I'm really just glad that particular issue is sorted, and the Attorney General has recognised that there was nothing unlawful or anything untoward in terms of the actual publication of the content therein itself. So I'm glad that particular chapter is finished, so to speak.
It's quite unusual for a first book to make it to the Attorney General's office. Not to, I don't want to. It's not a funny matter, but I'm sure it was a bit of a shock to reach that level. Are you relieved?
Well, I'm most certainly relieved, but yeah, I mean, I do think that it was shocking to me that it actually got to that point, particularly whenever I had made it clear to the family, Donohoe's family, maternal family, that essentially there was nothing in the book that wasn't already out there in the public domain. And I mean, newspapers the length and breadth of Ireland and in Britain, and indeed even I think in America, some of the international news networks, they've been covering this story and the content therein routinely, and there's been no issue there. I mean, there was no speculation in the book. I haven't even stated my view as to what I feel happened to the young lad. I've outlined the circumstances and context based on factual information, or what you would regard as fair comment. And I was condemned by the Democratic Unionist Party here. Well, I don't know if that's a bad thing, but I was condemned by them, and essentially I contacted one of the representatives who was putting this out over Twitter, and asked if they could point out to me any of the inaccuracies in the book, because they were saying it was without foundation and baseless, fiction, so to speak. And they couldn't provide any response or answer. They didn't provide any response or answer. And to this actual day, no one has pointed out any inaccuracy in the book to me by way of substance or content therein. So I mean, I don't see how you can be, I suppose, in a way, attacked so much and referred to the Attorney General's office on the basis of writing something which is actually true and factually correct. I made sure that to collect quite a large number of references for each of the things that I was stating, to protect myself, but also to protect your integrity when you are writing something, so that people can't turn around and say these sort of things, that essentially what you're outlining is not true. When you have the information there in front of you. I mean, I'm a bit of a bore in that respect, in that I always make sure to keep a copy of things and ensure that just what I'm saying is properly vindicated. I'm not really somebody, I don't really care much for my own opinion so on any of this, because to be honest with you, my opinion isn't really worth more than anyone else's. I mean, it's irrelevant to the matter. But just I'm relieved that that aspect of it is over. But there has been still a huge amount of abuse and threats and so forth, which have had to be reported to the police. And it's quite it's like nothing I've ever seen before in terms of being unprecedented. I mean, I have wrote about controversial subjects in the past, and yes, at times there have been responses which have been a bit ugly, but nothing like this. And what strikes me is that other people have been attacked and subject to a similar hate campaign by various people online, trolls, threats that they're getting, including, by the way, Stephen Nolan. And I mean, he's a national broadcaster and commentator. I mean, I'm only a small fry local amateur commentator. I know of another girl as well who's a journalist. She has received threats too. And I mean, on top of a huge amount of harassment. And I really don't, I mean, yes, when you put yourself out there, you do expect a certain amount of this, because not everybody is going to act responsibly. I mean, but some of the people, some of the things, and some of the people that are engaging in this, you would really sort of question what their motivations are, and you would ask if they actually properly thought about what they're doing, and also the damage that it's going to have on people. I mean, it's not like well, it's not, no writer is emotionless, and it has caused a huge amount of distress. I particularly would say in terms of my relatives, because they have had to go online and they've seen just various people writing these horrible things about me, and they found that particularly hurtful. And I think as well, a lot of that was actually very unwarranted, and for reasons which I'll clarify throughout the interview. But in terms of the way that the actual book that was referred to the Attorney General, the last sort of time that something like that occurred was when Margaret Thatcher, she took legal proceedings, I think it was in the High Court in Australia, for an injunction to try to ban the book Spycatcher, it was called, by a former MI5 officer, Peter Wright. And it was actually, he was revealing matters of criminality that he had engaged in against the then elected Labour government of the day. And she did ultimately fail in that respect. But I mean, what it showed was that she was taking a civil action against the book to ban it, to shut him up, not to prosecute him for wrongdoing. So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a bizarre situation on the whole.
You usually hear of stuff like that, and well, so you're told, in totalitarian type of societies.
Yes, yeah. I mean, for what is called a liberal democracy, I think, in my own opinion, that this was an illiberal move. But I'm glad that the government's chief legal advisor has actually recognised that it's not compatible with legislation as it stands, and I quite really question the actual reason for it ever having been referred there in the first place, because there was no speculation in it.
So talk more about that. You know, you touched on the harassment and stuff, and I'm sure it's a touchy subject for you, but just talk more about that, because, you know, just to clarify, it was you who instigated the awareness campaign for this in terms of your work with the police ombudsman. You know, you drove a lot of the activity that led to a lot of the, basically, the public's debate and the public's awareness of the whole case in general. And I think you were in contact with the mother as well beforehand. So it's, you know, talk about that, how difficult that must have been to have done this work with the intention of helping out not only the family, but calling out and keeping our elected leaders in the state accountable to the public in any good democracy, to then have it ripped from under you at the like after the book was published. You know, talk, what was the, how do you terms of those emotions, the harassment?
It is a touchy subject, and it's I mean, I don't want to, you know, I'm nothing special in the sense that, you know, I don't want to take credit for having raised, you know, all the awareness for this or anything like that. I mean, I think I made a contribution, yes, and I did my best in the circumstances. At the time, I was thanked for it by a huge number of people, and indeed some of those people have went from saying that they were praying for me and thanking me to the hilt, to actually sending me quite abusive messages, and that in itself was like a 180-degree turn. The thing that I mean, in terms of the statement from the DUP, I mean, you know, I kind of expected that something like that would happen with them, because essentially there is mention of them in the book and people connected to them. But I was quite surprised that it happened. People with responsible sort of positions in society were engaged in that. I mean, there's one particular independent councillor in the Derry Strabane sort of district, Raymond Barr, his name is. He had actually retweeted someone else's tweet, a troll's tweet, calling me a scumbag. And I challenged him on this, and I said that I didn't think that that was a particularly appropriate term to be referring to a member of the public, but, you know, given his position, and the fact that we in the public actually salary people like him who are public representatives. Not only that, but in this jurisdiction there is a code of conduct and standards in place in terms of local government, and not only that, I've been very, very complimentary and pleasant with him. In fact, he at one point, when we were engaged in conversations, he had actually been discussing with me, as basically was to suggestions as to what I would state to various different statutory organizations and bodies, like the chief constable, like the police ombudsman, and so forth. And I did up a draft of like questions that I thought were particularly pertinent and points that could be made. And he copied the vast majority of that and sent it off, and then put it online without any acknowledgement or recognition for the fact that it was me that came up with that. Even when, you know, there were people who were writing all sorts of nice things about it underneath. And I know for a fact that a member of the Donohoe family knew of that. and there was no recognition at all given of me. What I'll say about that, though, I mean, I don't wish to make things, I don't like making things personal or about personality, so to speak. But one of the things that he did, upon reflection, and I think it was really disturbing, was that he sent me a message. When I was looking back through my Facebook messages, I noticed that he actually sent me a message where he had tried to, well, he made mention, tried to involve his political opponents in circumstances surrounding the young man's tragic death, which I find really quite shocking, that someone who is an elected representative would send a message like that, especially to somebody who, I mean, I've never met the man, he doesn't know me, so to speak, and he sent that to me. I still have a copy of it, and just given his overall behavior towards me, it was encouraging an awful lot of people, third parties, trolls, to harass me, and I've had to contact the police about that. And essentially, I felt that it had gotten to breaking point, and that I had to report him to the local government regulator over this. What you find is that a lot of the people who are sending these abusive messages are just taking these people at face value, or whatever they see that they're posting online, particularly in the Donohoe's the family on Facebook group that they've created, and they're just basically reacting to what others are posting up without actually thinking of the consequences for themselves. And it's almost as though some people are making snowballs and letting others fire them. And I'm not sure that that's very responsible, because then you have young people, for example, who are sending me extremely vile and abusive messages, and that's all having to be reported to the police, and therefore those young people could get prosecutions for that. I mean, that doesn't seem to me to be particularly ethical. Likewise, a lot of people keep attacking me on the issue of stating that I had no permission to write this book. I mean, first of all, I'll say that legally permission is not actually needed, because this is not an authorized biography. But on the moral point of it, I notified Miss Fiona Donohoe. I notified Noah's mother twice. The first time was 8 days before my 29th birthday. It was on the 22nd of October, to say that I was writing a book. And the second time, I believe it was, off the top of my head, I think the 24th of November. And on both occasions, I made it very clear what I was doing, and that essentially that the information I was using was, I did state it was in the public domain, because I had said to her in those messages, and I've kept records of them, that having gone through all of the feedback from Noah's teachers and peers that was available online and through other media outlets, I had told her that basically I thought that she'd been a wonderful mother, and that reflected in just the traits and attributes of her son, and I think just his loss was really a loss to society generally, because I've no doubt that had he lived, he would have went on and filled his ambition to become a doctor within the National Health Service and save lives. I think there are people, whenever you put yourself in when you put yourself out there with something public like this, you always have people who have an axe to grind. And what, as I said before, I mean, I don't like making things personal. I would much rather if people just responded to it in a more professional way. If you're gonna, I have no problem with people offering professional criticism, constructive criticism, or feedback of negative feedback, but which is measured, yes, which is done in a proper way, and which is not abusive or an attack, so to speak. If you say, I disagree with the point that you've made here, I don't think that this is correct there, whatever, that's fine. I mean, or if they want to, for example, if they wanted to mock my writing style, or say that it's that of a primary school student or whatever, that's fine. that's okay. But people are sending me messages accusing me of horrendous things, like profiting off the death of a child. There isn't a single penny of this which is going into my pocket. The proceeds, with the exception of my literary agent's fee, the proceeds are going to the Community Rescue Service charity, and I'm providing full financial disclosure of that donation. I actually had intended to donate half to the Noah Donohoe Foundation charity and the other half to the Community Rescue Service. But given the way things have turned out, and just some of the statements by family members, I'm not sure if it would be welcome. So I think it would be better just to donate the full amount to the actual Community Rescue Service, because they were involved so heavily in the search and rescue operation to find Noah. And I think that they're badly stretched at the minute in terms of financial resources because of the pandemic. And on top of that, I would add that it's been extremely difficult for my parents in particular, because I have written about things before, yes, of a controversial nature. I'll detail some of the things in the later part of the interview, but I've never had death threats before. I've had them now, and a lot of this has happened as a result of some people's social media activity, and the things that people are saying really don't have any bearing when it comes to the actual facts or truth of the matter. And I think it's people are always going, like with this issue, people are going to find something to criticize you for. I mean, I don't think you couldn't have wrote a book on this subject that would have pleased everyone. I acknowledge that, but I think that I was very gracious to many people in the book who are now attacking me. And I mean, for example, I read out something. Whenever I was recovering from major surgery at the time, whenever I was in a lot of pain one night, and I actually started feeling that Noah's mother would have been in much greater pain and of a much different nature, because at least with mine, that you can take analgesia and it's going to ease it and it would pass over time because it was physical pain. But the pain that she has experienced is just something that no parent is ever going to get over. And I really do feel for her. And then one of the things I did was I wrote a poem and I put it on social media at the time, and it went viral. And then I actually had the chance to give her it. But I think I'd like to read this out, because it is something that a lot of people have said that it was actually one of their favorite parts of the book. And it was something that she told me that she would cherish. And I certainly got a lot of satisfaction out of that. Just that in a very deeply traumatic and traumatizing situation, that just to be able to make someone realize that there were others thinking about them, I thought that was a nice gesture. But this poem is it's on page 98, 99, and it was specifically written for Fiona. It's called A Mother's Love. I'll start it. It's a mother's love runs deep through every vein in the heart, and until that day she's gone, dear boy, it never can depart. She'll love you when the world walks out and wash away your tears, lavishing you with cuddles and joy forever throughout the years. But wherever you may cycle, what you hope to achieve, she'll be there right to the end, my friend, in a way no fool can deceive. And if at all she should lose her cub, the whole jungle she will pursue. For when the lioness wakes up, my lad, there's no one who can subdue. Still, in spite of all her heartache, she'll knock on every door, waking widows in the night, for the cub she doth adore. Whatever the storms and weather, she will continue the search and hope, uniting icy hearts of steel, loyal to Queen and Pope. No, nothing on earth can stop it. Even if the cause is lost, the lioness will not sleep at night, come rain, sun, snow, and frost. The law of nature dictates that she'll lament and weep alone, Until that day doth come, dear boy, when finally she brings you home. Let's rest in peace, Noah Donohoe.
It's a beautiful poem.
Yeah. Just let's bring it back in.
That kind of
emotion. But
I suppose that characterizes some of the intentions you were, providing throughout this process.
yes, and I mean, they certainly weren't for any financial gain. I think it was really a question of just being, Christianly, neighborly way to someone who had experienced such loss, because my own family had lost two relatives in very tragic circumstances, and I know all about death and bereavement. So I thought reaching out in this way and would be helpful, and raising as much awareness as I could. Just although I'm only one person, I think it was the community really that needs to be thanked for that, because one person can't do that alone. Although I think the last time I counted the petition that was set up by, as I understand it, friends of Fiona Donohoe in relation to the complaint I filed with the police ombudsman. I think the last time I counted it had about 64,000 signatures, which I think that's quite large for in terms of the fact that it was a local issue to begin with, and it raised it and elevated it to a much larger level. There were people from America and from Germany, England, Scotland, Wales, France, across the world that had gotten in contact with me when they had seen the issue, the actual complaint that was filed about the policing operation or lack thereof, really. And I think really it helped to broaden the horizon a bit in terms of Noah's name and legacy. And I mean, his paternal family, they have been in contact and have thanked me for the work that I've done, and just the book itself. They've been grateful, as it helped give them greater understanding and awareness of Ireland, because I recognise to people who are living in America that it's it's not a subject that's it's not straightforward. I mean, Ireland is the situation here is complex, and just in terms of the two communities and the whole policing issue and so forth. I mean, it's not one that you could explain maybe in a single paragraph or a single article. So I was glad to be of assistance then, and I hope in writing the book I was of assistance now, even maybe if it wasn't actually maybe appreciated, but that's okay.
Some of the aspects of the book, not saying that the book instigated this, but some of the aspects of the book are now being investigated further. Is that correct? From the PSNI and some of the local officials, John Finnegan being one, are referring to this as a public interest case. So therefore, it's being pushed a bit hard, being pushed further than what it was originally. Is that correct?
Well, it was Michelle O'Neill, that the Deputy First Minister. She referred to that in Parliament. She had said that yes, it was a public interest matter. She confirmed that, and John Finnegan immediately after the last inquest review had called very strongly on the police service here to review the investigation that they had actually conducted. And essentially to engage in one which was an actual investigation, a proper investigation. And I think that, but in saying that, I have, in fairness to John has actually been engaged in this particular issue from the start, and I had contacted him. I think it was back in July, and had raised all of these concerns with him, and he too had seen the complaint to the police ombudsman, and he had raised concerns about it as well. So he has been very proactive and extremely helpful, I think, throughout. I think that he's an excellent MP, and he knows all about loss himself. So in terms of Michelle O'Neill, I really like Michelle. I have faith in her. I think she's been very sincere and wants to help in relation to it. The problem is the bureaucratic and systematic, how would I put it, impairments on even politicians, trying to get around those. I mean, it's like, pushing a boulder up a mountain, so to speak, and there's an awful lot of red tape. Ministers cannot directly intervene in legal cases. Usually, I mean, it's an extremely rare situation, and they're advised against doing so. They're advised against any significant commentary that would sway things either way. So, I mean, I understand that in some respects they do have their hands tied, but I think that John and Michelle have been very good in terms of that. And in terms of the actual, in terms of the matter itself, of course, I had no doubt that it was a public interest matter, and I feel that it could, the circumstances, because there had been a series of sectarian attacks, including on one young Catholic teenager who also went to Noah's school, not far from where Noah was found, young Flynn Maguire. Essentially, there were parallels to what had happened and what had taken place. In some ways, I'm not actually speculating as to what fully happened. No, I just mean in the sense that Flynn himself had been cycling in the same sort of area, and just recently before Noah had actually went missing, and he was attacked in what has been treated as a hate crime. And I know that there have been a series of incidents around that sort of area against other Catholic youths. But I mean, I'm saying that as a factual matter. I mean, I'm not making this. I mean, some people are saying that this is sectarian to say, just to say this as it is. I mean, that these are not my words. I mean, this is the terminology of the PSNI. I mean, they have branded it a hate crime, not me, but I do believe that it is one. In terms of your question about whether the book has led to a renewed investigation or anything like that, I think it's very hard to tell. And I mean, I'm not going to claim credit for something that you don't know for certain if that is the case. But there were certainly issues raised in the book, particularly in chapter 3, in regards to the storm drain and access to it. There were widespread criticisms in the book of the policing operation that took place, particularly things like the fact that they didn't act on a tip-off from an anonymous tip-off, and the staff at Cash Converters raised concerns. They didn't act on it for 2 days during the search and rescue operation, whenever people had actually anonymously contacted them and said that there were drug dealers who were in Cash Converters, the shop, trying to pawn Noah's belongings, including his laptop and so forth, his clothing and school books. And I think that's appalling. I mean, they waited for 2 whole days to do that. And I think that any parent finding that out, given the trauma of the whole search and rescue operation, any parent finding that out, I can't imagine the sort of pain that would put them through. Negligence wouldn't be strong enough a word for that. There was also, I mean, there was an article in the Irish News recently where the Department of Infrastructure basically, I think queries had been put to them, and it had been raised that there was the prospect of an actual some sort of corporate manslaughter by way of failings by them, and I would just hope that that's not going to be used to stifle a proper police investigation into the matter. But I mean, it's for the remit of the coroner to actually determine how Noah died, and I can't really get into much in relation to that. But I would hope that just some of the parallels of things that have been happening in the area and how they've been treated and classed by the police. I would hope that that would be taken into account, and I have no doubt that Fiona will be resilient in seeking to get to the bottom of it, and ensuring truth and transparency for her son.
So a lot of this is to do with transparency from the state, how, and the police, and obviously as part of the state. How important is this to from a public interest clause perspective? And I'm going to make this two parts. And from a democratic perspective, what's how important is this for as a society to bring this into the public domain and ensure we're talking about issues relevant to political matters, not speculating on the circumstances of what happened?
Well, I mean, there's an old quote that everything's political, but I think that in relation to this, the way I would look at it is that the two go hand in hand in terms of your questions. The thing is, nobody elects a chief constable. No, they don't have a single vote. Nobody elects a police ombudsman here. They're not accountable to the public in a democratic electoral way. I mean, in England, it's hardly like this is a radical thing, but in England, you have elected police and crime commissioners who are answerable to the public, and you can hire and fire them. I mean, if they don't do what you want, if they don't deal with the issues that are being put on their desk, then you can sack them at the ballot box. And I think that's a very important sacred right for people to have. That is what I would hope that we could move to. There are families who are waiting years, dying off, and they're getting no answers from the police or the police ombudsman in relation to the deaths of loved ones. I have a family of my own that in those circumstances, and I mean, I shed some light on that. My grandfather's brother lived in an interface area in North Belfast, and he was shot to death because he was a Catholic while he was wrapping Christmas presents with his children. And we never had any. This happened shortly after, not long after I was born, but we never had any answers in relation to that. But until the police ombudsman, the Michael Maguire, he's a previous police ombudsman who has left the office. He described the issue of regulating the police as been akin to trench warfare. But he produced a report, a damning report into the police then, which showed that the same gun that had been used in my granddad's brother's murder was also subsequently used in the World Cup massacre at Loughlin Island. And that's basically where loyalist paramilitary gunmen went in and riddled a bar full of civilians that was frequented by both Catholics and Protestants. Basically, Ireland were playing Italy in the World Cup. The issue, once it was raised in the police ombudsman's report, a documentary was made in it. It was made on the basis of it, called No Stone Unturned. And essentially, that was a phrase that was used at the time, that there would be no stone left unturned, by the Secretary of State at the time, Patrick Mayhew. Of course, that wasn't true in the sense that it took decades before any of these things were established. But the horrifying thing about all of that is that the journalists who made that documentary were actually arrested and, on bogus charges. And they quite recently, they won a huge settlement from the police of almost £1 million in damages. And that was for producing the documentary. And I mean, the police tried to accuse them of having taken information that they shouldn't have, or something along those lines. But I find, when my family and I went to see that documentary in the cinema, we found it very helpful and informative. And we were very appreciative to Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey for having taken the time and the risk to do that. shows that there are still good people out there who are prepared to put their careers and their lives at risk to get the public some answers by way of accountability. But just to go back to your question, the issue in terms of the public interest clause is loosely defined, if defined at all. And the current police ombudsman is a solicitor herself, Mrs. Anderson. And when I had written to her outlining the concerns that I had as a citizen about the way that the whole operation into Noah's tragic death and disappearance had been handled, or rather mishandled, I was rebuffed. And then that's essentially how I tried to use the public interest clause to get the police ombudsman to probe the matter. And she still wouldn't do it. And then that's when the petition was set up by friends of Fiona Donohoe, and it reached over the 64,000 signatures. I didn't set the petition up. And I believe that Fiona signed it herself actually at the time. But I mean, I suppose in a way that even the fact that they ignored that, given the huge number of people who had actually put their names to it and wanted to have this whole thing probed, I think it shows just really the lack of democracy in these bodies. And many of these people are really senior civil servants, and they're part of the system, and they're put there to be yes men and women. They're not. A lot of them are not put there. I'm not making accusations against any particular individual, including the incumbent, but I think a lot of them are put there as appointments rather than those who have an electoral mandate. And just the reason that any politician has to listen to some extent to the electorate is because they have the right to send them their P45 and fire them. And without that, I think that people really preside over a undemocratic form of bureaucracy and, in a way, almost tyranny. They're a law unto themselves in many respects, in terms of what they choose to probe and what they discard or bury. And despite that office being in operation now since the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement of 1998, there hasn't. I mean, I think the first police ombudsman, Nuala Lone, I think she was excellent, and I think she was an English woman and a solicitor who was very impartial and rolled up her sleeves and really, really tackled the issue. She had, in no uncertain terms, stated in documentaries that the state here was running serial killers, whether it was Mark Haddock and the UVF, who was paid £80,000 out of taxpayers' money and engaged in over 20 murders, or Freddie Scappaticci and the IRA. I mean, I forget even the number of murders that he was implicated in, but essentially the state were running these people, and there was no accountability whatsoever. So the question arises as to whether this is still going on, and to what extent is it going on in our name. These horrific things from the past, they haven't gone away. Although there has been relative peace, there are things that are fragile. Community relations are fragile and sensitive, particularly at the minute with Brexit and the issue of the Irish Sea border. The issue, an issue that happened very recently was at the Ormeau Park. Sorry, not Ormeau Park, but the betting shop, the Ormeau betting shop, where just relatives of the victims of that particular atrocity, and also a man who actually had been shot there himself but survived. They were completely mishandled by the police and abused. And I think that really it collapsed a lot of confidence in policing on both sides. I mean, I've noticed that both unionists and nationalists actually criticised the police for that, and one officer is currently suspended by the chief constable, but the chief constable himself has maintained that he will not be quitting. And while, I mean, of course, he personally was not involved in that particular incident directly, he has to have some accountability for the conduct of his officers. And I think that, some of the steps that he's taken are correct, but ultimately it's stuff like this and the fact that, there were dozens of UVF men in balaclavas out in the street in East Belfast just recently there as well, totally in breach of COVID regulations. And the police did nothing to apprehend them. But yet, look at the treatment that was dished out to people who had actually went to a remembrance ceremony at a Tibetan shop. I think it's really, it comes back to a term that I've used in the book called selective enforcement, where, one law applies to one group of people but doesn't apply to another. And I think the only way we're going to get around that is actually being able to hire and fire the people who preside over these organizations.
I.e. more democracy.
Yes, I think I'd show me a situation anywhere where a little more democracy was ever a bad thing.
Exactly.
I mean, there's men and women around the world who would give their lives for the right to hire and fire the people who govern them. And in not exercising that right, in a way, well, we're denigrating what many people have actually fought and died for, and struggle for today. But I think really it's a question of extending that to further areas of life, including the workplace, the community, virtually every aspect of it. I mean, the churches, you could apply it in virtually every situation, and I don't think necessarily it would be a bad result.
No, I don't think so. It's the sort of behavior that's going on from the state and its agents, let's call them. It's almost like a technocratic feudalism.
Yeah, I mean, we live in what some people have termed a benign fascist state, a liberal fascist state, a benign liberal fascist state, which has abolished the death penalty. But instead of being presided over by unelected officials in jackboots and uniforms, I mean, they're wearing suits and they have the guise of being I suppose in a way experts and professionals. Those terms are very widely used. I'm not criticizing people who have particular specialism in certain fields, but I think that whenever you start talking to people in the street about attorney generals, police ombudsman, chief constables, bring this whole complex web of seniority into it, I think you'll find that with a lot of people, they're detached from the actual democratic process. Not everyone, of course. Most people have an awareness of these things, but a lot of people don't vote because they don't believe that it's going to change anything, when actually I think that if everyone voted, it would change a lot of things. I believe that we need to move to what I think they have in Australia, whereby people are actually fined for not voting. I think that would be a much more sensible thing. And then you would find that people would get governments which are genuinely representative of the population.
That's a topic for another interview. I think we can discuss that. In fact, some of this behaviour is reminding me of, I know I don't want to draw too many parallels because it's different countries, different times, but there was an essay written once by a liberal historian called Samuel Huntington. It was called, we hear this for an ironic statement, The Crisis of Democracy. And basically he alludes to the civil rights protests, the environmental protests, the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. And that was referred to as a crisis because people were becoming too democratic. They were becoming too involved and participating and active in the democratic and political arena. And he was basically saying that you don't need to be involved. You've elected these leaders, you've elected us. We know what's right, and we'll represent your interests. And that kind of behaviour through this whole case has been reflected perfectly by the stenographers of power, let's call them. You just uphold the status quo, and I for one commend you for standing up to it.
Well, I mean, Benito Mussolini said the same thing to the Italian people, that, I mean, if they elected him as a strong man, that he would restore a sort of pride in Italy and, you know, pride in being Italian, and in return they would get some form of guaranteed employment. He was actually the first European leader to introduce a universal pension system. But it's a question, you know, I'm skeptical of people who will promise you heaven on earth, but as only insofar as the fact that you're prepared to relinquish the right to sack them. I mean, I think it's that anyone who makes a promise like that, but says, but you know, the one thing that you have, the one check and balance over me that you have, you can no longer have that if you're going to have all these other things. I think we need to be very wary of people like that, not take our eyes off the ball.
I agree. You know, we forget Mussolini and Hitler, I believe, were democratically voted in, so we should be very
well. Yeah, I mean, Hitler was never voted in with a majority, but I mean,
majority, no, but
yes, not yes, but you're right in saying that yes, they had an electoral mandate, but the thing is, it was, you know, only for certain things, and then eventually they decided just to abolish the whole democratic system and essentially appoint themselves in the same way that senior civil servants operate, without any checks and balances. And well, I think that Arlene Foster used an interesting phrase recently, and I think I don't often find myself agreeing with her, but I do agree with the phrase that she used in respect of when discussing the RHI scandal. She in the public inquiry, the RHI, she said about her special advisor that she was accountable for them and their behavior, but she was not responsible for them. So I mean, that's, you know, in the sense that, you know, electorally, yes, she is accountable to the electorate. That's correct, but she's not legally responsible for their actual conduct. And yeah, in a way, that's true. And I don't think she was necessarily wrong in saying that. But I think just generally, you know, in terms of the situation regarding Noah, the book has laid out a series of recommendations as to how to get around the current impasse we have in relation to policing, in relation to families who are awaiting answers to these sort of problems. And I would hope that those who read it would avail of that and would essentially be proactive in raising these matters with their elected representatives and putting them in, you know, essentially in the ballot box.
So we've talked a lot about accountability and transparency and ensuring you exercise your vote and the importance of maintaining some level of democracy and solving such complex issues and important issues, but which can all sometimes have a negative, you know, connotation and view that we're proposing here. Other than we're just stating facts and observations. But has there been any examples of collective action and cases which have been resolved locally or even nationally? That could be, you could draw parallels or compare it to the current case.
Two cases spring to mind that happened in terms of a community effort that I think would help in terms of emulating them in respect of the Noah Donohoe case. I think, well, the first one, both happened in North Belfast, I would say. The first one is that of young Peter McBride, who was murdered the year after we were born in 1992. And he was basically on his way home from the shop when he was shot to death by two soldiers who had basically been hassling him and verbally and physically being abusive towards him. And the young lad made a run for it and they opened fire and just killed him on the spot. I think that his family led a heroic campaign where they challenged it, through every legal mechanism they could. And they eventually got the two soldiers charged, and also they were found guilty of murder. But the British government decided to let them out, and they were reinstated back into the British Army. And throughout that whole time, the Daily Mail had ran a campaign of support for them. There were Tory politicians standing up in the House of Commons saying that these people had done nothing wrong when they had been found guilty in a court of law of murder. And I think the family of Peter McBride, I mean, I remember they handed an A4 petition into Downing Street, and whenever the media asked Downing Street to comment on it, they said that it had been lost. So the family returned shortly thereafter with an A2 sized or an A2 or A1 sized petition about the matter, to make sure that it wasn't lost and also to reinforce the point. But they had actually asked, they had brought it to all of the, taken it up with the Irish government to have the soldiers prosecuted, and that did work. They had taken it up with the local elected leaders and the Irish government to have the soldiers sacked and dismissed from the British Army. That was not successful, not because of the family, but because of the actual, I suppose, just the way the UK armed forces operate, and the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, refused to do it. But one thing that I thought they did that was particularly of merit in relation to what happened, it was that after these soldiers had been reinstated, it was found that they were actually working at a British Army base in Germany, and the family petitioned the German government at the time of I think it was Gerhard Schroeder. They petitioned to have the soldiers removed off German soil because essentially they had murdered a teenager and been found guilty of it in a court of law, a UK court of law. And as far as I know, they were successful in that respect. But the other case I would refer to is that of, and I think you'll remember it as well, but it was a teenager in North Belfast called Jared Lawler. Yes, I think it happened in 2002 when we were children at the time. But Jared was murdered by loyalist paramilitaries who were working as agents of the state, and his family were quite disenchanted with the way the state was trying to protect these people. In fact, they even had to, the family actually had to take the coroner to court in a judicial review to get the coroner to allow for a witness to provide testimony and evidence, which essentially implicated these people as state agents and as being involved in murder. The family also conducted a community inquiry into it as part of an overall consultation within the locality. And while they never ultimately got justice for Jared, I think that their efforts were heroic, and I think they were very commendable, and they raised a substantial amount of awareness. And I mean, this was in an era before social media. You have to bear that in mind. And essentially, it wasn't. It was also a much more tense time because the ceasefires were not really that long in place here. The peace process was still in its infancy, and there was still the reforms that happened in 2006, 2007 in terms of the justice system, they had not actually taken place. So, I mean, we're talking about, quite a dark era. And I think that really those two cases really stand out to me as being of particular merit, and certainly ones that if I was in the same situation, I would emulate. I only would say that I think really that each situation is bespoke and distinct, but I think through precedent cases like that, you can find really strength through example, and it is possible in ways to overcome hurdles. And I think it's just really about the determination, resilience of the people involved, and just the way that they're conducting it, and what they hope to achieve. And I mean, I'm not telling anyone what to do or how to run their campaign or anything like that. It's entirely up to them. But those were, I mean, just in terms of my own analysis, I've always personally admired the families of those two particular victims.
Yeah, as you said, each case is distinct and bespoke. But as Mark Twain said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it sure rhymes a lot.
Yes, I mean, in a way, we go round in circles, to some extent. Although I think, I suppose, each generation has to learn the same lessons of the prior generation over again, to reinforce the reasons why people need to be on their guard and wary of certain things and not making the same mistakes over and over. And I think we learn a little more each time. And I hope people do, certainly do from this case, regarding Noah. I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned, and I would hope that the elected leaders here would, essentially, once this case is over, and I really do hope and pray that the family get the result that they want. I think as parents deserve that, and society deserves it. But I think that the elected leaders here would also have a responsibility to implement widespread reforms of policing, and particularly around the area of missing person cases and search and rescue operations. There was, for example, there was no liaison or involvement with the government in the south of Ireland. The Garda Síochána, they have expert personnel who have been used in the cases of return the disappeared. I mean, victims of Republican violence, who have been ferried across the Irish border. I mean, I feel that one of the things that could have been done differently would have been to make a formal ministerial request to the actual Irish government minister, to have members of An Garda Síochána deployed in terms of the Donohoe police and operation. And I think that's still an option, in terms of the fact that there's seems to have been a bit of a renewed investigation into it, or the reviewing aspects of it. And I think it's things like this, bringing outsiders in, who aren't, part of the sort of confines of the system here in the north. I think that would be helpful. Those who have no particular bias or affiliation with any existing structures.
You obviously know these cases a lot better than I do, so I will certainly not question that logic at all. But just finishing off on a couple of last questions. I understand that you're in the midst of a second book. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Not in relation to the Donohoe case, but I think you started this book before the Noah Donohoe scandal book. You want to touch on what that's about and inform people?
Yes, it's a book. It's a book called "The Demon Doctor and the Concora Scandal," and it's all about paedophile psychiatrist Dr. Maurice Fraser, who was involved in a paedophile vice ring that were abusing children at the Concora Boys' Home in East Belfast. They got away with it for years until the scandal was finally blown. And essentially, it follows the trail of Fraser, because he was involved in the paedophile ring in England, here in terms of Concora, and also over in America, and had convictions for each. But I mean, whenever it became clear that he was doing these horrible things, the the Attorney General at the time of the UK, Sir Patrick Mayhew, actually went to his fitness to practice hearing with the General Medical Council, which was an act of, I mean, not unprecedented, but an act of intimidation, but to show those on the panel who could have dismissed Fraser essentially how connected this man was. And he had, I don't use the terms friends in high places lightly, but he really was connected in terms of the political sphere of things, and professionally connected as well with other paedophiles, particularly those who were coming in from Whitehall as civil servants and abusing children at Kincora. But that book is based on a series of freedom of information requests, and the fact that some of the victims of Kincora have got in contact with me and have provided me with just various reference points and information, because they feel very badly let down by the historical institutional abuse inquiry. I mean, it concluded that there was no overarching state conspiracy or, state involvement, and it more or less inferred that the only people responsible for abuse at Kincora were the staff. One of whom was actually an MI5 agent, but William McGrath, that is. But the thing about that inquiry was that it did not have the legal powers to actually compel witnesses and documentation and evidence. So how could you reach that sort of judgment without having actually examined the material and cross-examined the witnesses and hostile actors, I would say, in terms of the events that went on? But essentially, the purpose of that book was really to provide a more complete, thorough, authoritative and accurate account as to what was going on in Kincora by this paedophile vice ring, and to do that through basically just following the trail of moral destruction left by Maurice Fraser. And I mean, what is absolutely shocking is that even after, and this reinforces the emphasis and point on democratic accountability, is the fact that Fraser was allowed to continue to practice as a child psychiatrist whenever it was made clear that he was sexually abusing children, and that when the authorities were aware of his previous convictions. It also touches on the subject of the murder of young Brian McDermott, I have to say, whose body was cut to pieces, hacked, and then burnt and put in a sack and dumped in the River Lagan. The police had a file linking that murder to someone, a man by the name of John McCaig, and also he was part of the vice ring of what was going on at Kincora. But the director of public prosecutions, again unelected, was sent this file and buried it. They took no action. And whenever push came to shove, they actually tried, I think it was a stitch up, where they tried to actually pin it on one of Brian's family members. But one of the victims at Kincora was actually able to provide me with information, more or less stating that some of the people that worked there and their associates were involved in that particular murder of Brian. And I would like to use that book as a way of, first of all, providing literary scrutiny of what happened, and raising awareness of the issue. But I've engaged in discussions with survivors of Kincora on what sort of recommendations and changes in society they would like to see, so that something as horrible as that would never happen again. Another child that died in relation to it was one who was being trafficked here in Ireland, but also throughout the UK, called Stephen Waring. He committed suicide on the ferry over to Liverpool. It was put down to a suicide, but they stated that the young lad no longer wanted to live because he was essentially being passed around all of these establishment perverts, and sent over to London, and Liverpool, all these different places to be abused by paedophiles. None of whom have ever been fully brought to account for what their grave crimes and sins. There was a plea bargain in relation to the staff at Kincora, in that they changed their pleas the night before the trial, from saying that they were going to plead not guilty to then say they were pleading guilty, so that there would not be a long and protracted trial, and the people would be able to give evidence under oath and provide testimony. And I mean, John McCaig, who I mentioned, had actually offered to. He had done a deal with the police to name names of the other paedophiles and abusers, and he was shot to death by state agents and a paramilitary force the actual morning of the trial. So it collates all of these issues together, and it shows the wider picture as to what was going on there, and tries to get some measure of, I wouldn't say justice, because I don't think that any words that I could use would ever get justice for people who've been through those horrific and traumatic experiences, but it certainly tries to raise awareness of them. And I would hope really to achieve that in that endeavor, and that would be my main goal. And I'm keep in touch with several of the survivors in relation to it, and they've been tremendously helpful, and I really, really do commend their courage and bravery in coming forward and giving me the information. But they're so fed up with being let down by the state that they're turning to commentators, authors, journalists, so forth in the media to get their stories out there as to what was really going on. And I think that's very important, because I mean, at the end of the day, we rely on that to hold the state to account. And that's what maintains democracy in any society. But that's just that's something that's a work in progress, and I hope that when the time comes, we'll certainly have discussions about that. And who knows? I mean, I've certainly been engaged in talks with various people about making a documentary about it, but you and I will work together on that regardless.
Well, I hope to work with you on that. I obviously, freedom of information, accountability, democracy are all important subjects for you. Do you have a favorite writer or intellectual or person who's sort of instilled those principles and values in you?
I have a favorite writer, but for every genre. I think we'd be here all day going through that. But I think in terms of journalism, I think I really enjoyed Chris Moore's books. He was a local journalist here, a national journalist now. He wrote a book on the Kincora scandal, and also a book on the scandal with at the time the Father Brenton Smith in the Catholic Church. And I think both of them were horrific in terms of the exposure that Chris provided, but at the same time, it was proper journalistic endeavor. I mean, the man really, really had put a lot of time and effort into it, and I commend him. He's someone I think very highly of. And I mean, those books made a very significant impact on me. In terms of, I'm not really into novels that much. I mean, Robert Harris would be
me neither.
A good contemporary writer. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Historically, I like his work, The Great Gatsby and The Diamond as Big as the Ritz. But no, I'm much more in favor of nonfiction. I think, as you can tell, I mean, I don't really care much for my opinion. It's quite a lot, really, about. I just wish to know the facts of a matter, and that's just how I sort of think. But I think it's maybe an Asperger's trait, but who knows? But before we conclude, I mean, just one of the things I'd like to say, before the interview ends, is that for anyone watching, I would really ask for them to not engage in any sort of online abuse or harassment of me or any other individuals. whether it's myself, Stephen Nolan, or any other commentator, anyone at all in relation to the Noah Donohoe case, because I think there's been a huge amount of that. There's already 2 police investigations going on so far into people who've been harassing me because of the social media content of others. And essentially it takes its toll. And I don't want to see any young people ending up with a criminal conviction. But it's at the point where people have had no choice. It's got to breaking point where you've had to involve the police in relation to it. People can't really take much more of it. I just want to emphasize that point, because I don't want anyone getting into trouble over it. But at the same time, I'm a citizen too, and I have rights, and I think people need to show respect on both ends.
Absolutely. If you want
to, Anthony, I would just point out that in terms of one of the things that people keep criticizing me over is the fact that they're routinely stating that I wrote this book without the permission of Noah's parents. And I did address it previously, I think, in a point where I would say that I mentioned about the fact that I had notified his mother on the 22nd of October and then again the 24th of November, and the book was available on Amazon in January. I never received any objection to it. There was no objection raised by her or solicitor. Her solicitor objected on her behalf, but that was actually on the day that it went to publication and hours after it became available. So, I mean, you can't unpublish a book. Once it's out there, that's it. And I just wanted to clarify that, because a lot of people have been attacking me over that, and I wanted to state there were certainly months there for Fiona or her solicitor to raise an objection, and I didn't receive one. And if they had have done so, I certainly would have. I wouldn't have wrote the book against her wishes if that had been expressly known to me at the time by her or her solicitor. It's just I just wanted to clarify that, because I think it's a point. I don't know if it's a point of confusion or if people are being misled by others, but in a malicious way. But I felt the need to point that out, because just the amount of abuse and harassment I've had in relation to this has been, well, really quite distressing. But I don't want to end on a negative point, but it's just something I thought, the fact that I needed to clarify.
Yeah, it's a point well made. So thanks for clarifying for myself and for everybody else who decides to watch this. We will end it there, actually, and wrap this up. So anybody who watched this, I want to thank you for watching. We will be doing other topics in the future. Might not be so relevant to the Noah Donohoe case, but it will most certainly be political. It will most certainly be democratic, and it will span both the United States and local issues. So if you could subscribe or comment if you've got any questions, then please do so. But we're going to finish it up there, Donal.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, Anthony. Yeah.
All right.